Hey YouTube, welcome back to my channel, Taylor Talks Tales. Today I have a video for you. It's what I read in May. So just like with April, I had a fantastic reading month in May. I ended up reading 30 books, and I will definitely say that of the 30, I enjoyed the vast majority of what I read. There are a couple standout 1-star reads that were pretty awful, and a couple 2 stars that were a little disappointing, but for the most part, I had a very enjoyable reading month, and I want to go ahead and share the books with you. I am going to talk about 28 out of the 30 because 2 of the 30, one was Daring Greatly by Brene Brown, and then the other was another book of hers, and I don't think you guys would be interested in those on this channel. If you are interested in me reviewing more nonfiction or self-help type books and my thoughts on them, you can always let me know, but for the most part I'm just going to stick with the fiction books that I read. So, just like how I did in April, I am going to do it by star rating first, so I'm going to do the worst to best and just kind of do the name, author, star rating, go through all 28, and then after that I will talk about like the best of, the worst of, notable books, some books that I think you guys should check out, or books I had strong opinions on, and that'll come after the star rating and just going through what the books are. And before we get into the rest of the video, I also want to say, so I ended up reading 4 ebooks, and all 4 ebooks ended up being towards the bottom of the list. Like, I didn't enjoy any of the ebooks I read. That's not intentional. There are definitely ebooks I've read that I liked, so it's nothing against ebooks. It just, I think it had to do with the fact that I received one from a friend who wanted me to check a book out, and then there's a couple that I ended up getting because I wasn't sure I was going to like to begin with, because the physical books I took a chance on. I'm like, I will probably like this as opposed to the ebooks. I wasn't sure. So it's nothing intentional, but you'll see right away as I go through the list that all the ebooks are pretty much at the bottom. So anyway, before this video gets too long, let's get into this. Okay, really quick, I'm going to talk briefly about the one book that I am not rating. So for a star rating, this just doesn't have a rating. It's not a 0 out of 5 star, it just doesn't have a rating, and that is We Ride on Sticks by Quan Berry. Reason why this doesn't get a rating at all is because I didn't realize it, but I received an arc of this as a gift. And when I was reading it, there were a lot of typos, and there were a lot of issues with the writing. The story was interesting, but there were issues with writing, and from what I've gathered, I think there were some big changes made from the advanced reader's copy to the final published version. So I ordered myself a copy of the published version, and it's in the mail. Hopefully it'll get here soon, because I want to compare the two, and because I want to give this a fair review, and I don't think I can give it a fair review because I just think this has some problems with it that were probably and hopefully fixed in the published book. So we'll see. But for now, this is just gonna float around there. I'm not really gonna talk too much about it. It's just no rating for now. Alright, now we will get into the books. So, with a 1-star rating, I read The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware. Next up, The Haunted by Danielle Vega, which is also 1 star. And then Upright Women Wanted by Sarah Gailey was 2 stars. Nevernight by Jay Kristoff, also 2 stars, and I am sorry, I know I'm going to get a lot of hate because a lot of people love that book, but that was a 2 star for me. And I'll talk why about it. Now we're going into the physical books. The Boatman's Daughter by Andy Davidson, 2 stars. Descent by Tim Johnston, 2.5 stars. Dark Ride by Anne Robb White, 2.5 stars. By Michael Brent Collins, 3 stars. How to Make a Wish by Ashley Herring Blake, 4 stars. Darling Rose Gold by Stephanie Robel, 4 stars. Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, 4 stars. A Lush and Seething Hell by John Horner Jacobs, 4 stars. Lullabies for Suffering and Garden of Fiends, both tales of addiction horror, both 4 stars. The Haunted Forest Tour by James A. Moore and Jeff Strand, 4 stars. Ghostland by Duncan Ralston, 4 stars. Enter Night by Michael Rowe, 4 stars. Camp Slaughter by Sergio Gomez, 4.5 stars. Dear Laura by Gemma Amor, 4.5 stars. The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock, 4.5 stars. The Cruel Prince Trilogy by Holly Black, which includes The Cruel Prince, The Wicked King, and Queen of Nothing. As a whole, the trilogy is a 5-star trilogy. I would say the first 2 books were 5-star books, and this one was a 4.5, but overall it was a very enjoyable series. My Pretties, 5 stars. A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, 5 stars. Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson, 5 stars. Water by Michael McDowell, 5 stars. Last but not least, If It Bleeds by Stephen King, 5 stars. Alright, now that I did the star rating and ranked the books from worst to best, I want to go ahead and talk more in depth about some of the books, some of my favorite books of the month, some of my least favorite books, and just any notable and noteworthy books. So, let's start with some awesome books that I think you guys should check out. One of which I really want to just briefly mention because I already did a review on it, which is Blackwater by Michael McDowell. This book was fantastic. I fell in love with it right away. I could not put this down even though it's a huge book. It doesn't feel like it's a very large book because you're just constantly flipping pages, going through, getting sucked into this world. The atmosphere and the setting is very just done so well that you really feel like you're there. The characters are fascinating. You love them, you hate them, you just want to keep watching what they're going to do next. And it's just true Southern Gothic at its finest, so definitely go check out my review, but this was one of my favorite books of the month, and I knew I was going to like it, but I didn't realize how much I was going to like it, but I fell in love with it, and I'm so glad that I own my own copy of this book, because it's definitely going to be a reread in the future. Then we have If It Bleeds by Stephen King. So this is probably one of my favorites of the month. I was very excited to dive into this book, and I enjoyed every single novella that I read. Especially if I had to, I mean, it's really hard for me to pick which of the novellas I really liked, because all 4 of them were enjoyable and had their strengths. I liked Life of Chuck because the first part of it has this almost apocalyptic feel to it, and reading it when all these crazy things are going on in the world right now, from coronavirus to rioting to murder hornets, you name it, it was very fun to read that. And Mr. Harrigan's Phone, even though there were some parts of that story that were pretty predictable, I still liked it. It's my kind of story, and the creepiness, I liked it. Rat was fun. I always love those, like, be careful what you wish for stories. And I also, of course, enjoyed If It Bleeds, which is based off of basically one of the characters in it is Holly Gibney, and she is from the Bill Hodges trilogy, which I haven't finished that series, by the way. I've read the first 2 and enjoyed them, and I really liked the If It Bleeds novella in this. I liked the story a lot because I feel like it's very relevant as well in the day and age of media and covering disasters and just awful things happening. I liked it. In fact, I really feel like this is a good collection to read now. I think it's one of his better novella collections. It's not like different seasons level, or it, you know, because I feel like that and a couple of his like classic novella or short story collections are still #1, but I really enjoyed this, and especially reading it right now, it just felt very relevant to me, and just proves that Stephen King still has a lot of talent. He's still going, and I am still a Stephen King fangirl, still a constant reader, and I actually think I enjoyed this novella collection more than I enjoyed The Institute. And I really enjoyed The Institute, but I feel like if I put the two and two together, I feel like I just blew through this and loved all 4 stories in this, and the Institute was still really enjoyable, but if I had to pick between the 2, I would say I liked this one, and this is my favorite book that he's written in the last few years to come out. I liked all the stories. It was very fun, very enjoyable, relevant, and I just recommend it to pretty much anybody who's looking for some fun stories and just wants a little bit of distraction, but at the same time kind of connecting to what is going on in the world as well. So definitely give If It Bleeds a shot. Highly, highly recommend it. If I had to pick, this is probably tied with Blackwater for my favorite reads of the month. Next book I want to bring up, Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. So I've read some other Brandon Sanderson books before, and I've pretty much liked all of his books. I like the Stormlight Archive better than Mistborn, I would say. And I picked this one up just partly because it's a standalone, and it's also Brandon Sanderson, and I do want to read more of his work. And funny enough, I actually think this is my favorite book of his, even though the Stormlight Archive is like the favorite of all of his fans, and fantasy fans in particular are just like, these are the best. For some reason, this one gripped me more, or not gripped me more, but I just fell in love with it. I think it's just who I am as a reader, and I think this one, I just connected with the characters super well. Like, Stormlight Archive, they're 5-star books for me, so don't think that I'm hating on them. I just think that this is a very underrated book by Brandon Sanderson, and I think because it's a standalone, I appreciate it a little bit more because I will read series and do enjoy some series, but I do typically prefer standalone books as opposed to big long series. And I think because this one is a standalone, or at least it was when it was written, I think there's going to be a companion novel that's coming out at some point, but it has a conclusion, and you can read it as a standalone and just enjoy it. You don't need anything more. You don't need to have read any other Brandon Sanderson book to enjoy this story. And at its heart, it's really a book about these really interesting characters. You've got 2 sisters. You have a sword that has sentience, and there's some humor and comedy and really cool magic systems in this story that I really enjoyed a lot. So I think the reason why I would say this is my favorite Brandon Sanderson book, besides the things I just mentioned too, is that there's this mystery element to it, and like this kind of piecing things together, almost in like you're like solving this whatever's going on and putting these puzzle pieces together. And I liked that. And I also liked too that they're trying to prevent a war in this book, as opposed to it being a book about war and lots of battles and things going on. So I thought that it was really interesting that they're focusing on that. And there's also a little bit of a romance in this, but not enough to distract you if you don't like romance. So I do think this is a very underrated fantasy novel and a very underrated Brandon Sanderson novel. I think a lot of people either just don't read this or they don't seem to like it as much as his other works, but I think it should be up there with the rest of his work. I really enjoyed it a lot, and I loved that the magic deals with colors. I thought it was so unique. The magic system is very accessible. Like, it's a very accessible fantasy novel, especially if you don't necessarily like high fantasy, which I am kind of mixed feelings about high fantasy. I love fantasy in general, but I tend to like different other types of fantasy, like paranormal or urban fantasy or portal fantasy or like low fantasy. I find that to be a little bit more interesting and accessible to me, or like dark fantasy and horror fantasy, as opposed to high fantasy. It's kind of hit and miss. It depends on a lot of different factors to it, but this one is definitely top of my list for high fantasy, and I really liked it and would definitely recommend it for anybody. Dear Laura, Gemma Amor. This one's a novella. I ended up only reading one novella this month, and this one was very enjoyable. Gemma Amor, she actually does a lot of writing for No Sleep and creepypasta, and this kind of feels like a creepypasta, and I do mean that as a compliment because I read a lot of creepypasta, and No Sleep on Reddit is basically why I use Reddit. I don't really go on Reddit for anything else except to read creepy stories. So this one, it's following a girl. She starts out as a girl, and then kind of she ends up at the very end of the story, she's in her 40s, and it's kind of told in dual timeline a little bit. And this one was just very creepy. It's following this character named Laura, and her best friend disappears, and she starts getting letters in the mail asking her to do certain things in order to get tips and hints on where her friend's body may be. And so she starts this correspondence that takes place on her birthday every year, and you just follow her all the way up from being, 14 all the way up until her 40s, and then yeah, it goes from there. It's a little, short story. It's a novella, but it packs a lot in this, and I cannot wait to check out other work by Gemma. I think it was just very fun to read a female horror author, because that's what I'm aspiring to be, and I thought it was very solid. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5, just because I feel like there are a couple things that I would have changed a little bit on, but that's going to be in spoilery territory, so I don't want to spoil anything, but I thought it was a very solid horror novella. I really think I think novellas and horror go well together. I've been very impressed with all the horror novellas I've been reading. I historically haven't read a lot of novellas, but recently I've been picking them up, and all the horror ones have been wonderful. So I highly recommend checking this one out. It's very creepy, and it keeps you on your toes, and I liked it, and can't wait to check out more. Next up is The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock. This book I enjoyed as well. It's dark, it's gritty, it has elements of horror in it, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's like a true horror book. It's more of a crime story and sort of a thriller at times, and it's really just a very gritty, dark story, and it has some good writing in it. Like, it definitely has a literary feel to it, and I'm excited that they're making this into a movie. Of course, I'm always nervous when they are making something into a movie, because I feel like you lose a lot of good. Is Enter Night by Michael Rowe. This book, I really liked it. The reason why I gave it a 4-star is it was solely based off of the ending, actually, I would say. I felt like the ending wrapped up too fast. Because for the most part, this book is very character-driven, and it has a sense of place I really liked. Like, you really feel like you're in this small Canadian town in the 70s, and you just are very immersed in the story, and I really liked the characters, and I was following them and rooting for them, and things started escalating as you are piecing together what's going on, and then of course when the vampire element kicks in, it doesn't necessarily, I wouldn't say it's like a super horrific novel. Like, I didn't necessarily feel like it's all that scary, but it's just still a very compelling read. The reason why I only gave it 4 out of 5 star, though, even though I really liked it, I liked the writing, I liked the descriptions, I liked the characters, was pretty much based off of the fact that this book ends really fast, and it didn't have a resolution per se. There are a lot of things left up in the air and just weren't really resolved, and that kind of bothered me a little. I mean, actually, it bothered me quite a bit. In fact, originally I was going to give this a 3.5, but I did bump it back up to 4 because there is sort of a story after this book. It's almost like a novella length, and it's like a letter from a character, and it sort of explains a little bit more what happens in the story. So that bumped it back up to a 4. But originally, based off of the ending and how I just wanted there to be a little bit more. Like, I felt like just maybe added extra 10 pages could have solved that problem of the ending. So if you don't like your endings without any big resolutions, or with things left hanging and you're like, oh wait, what happened to this person or this person, then this might not be the book for you. But it's a fun, enjoyable, very atmospheric vampire read. It kind of puts a little bit of a twist on the genre, and if you do like Salem's Lot, I feel like you'll like this book. It's has similar elements to Salem's Lot, but I don't think it's a ripoff of it. It's just kind of borrowed some elements from Salem's Lot, but it's fun, and I recommend it. Next we have The Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. This was a surprise for me. I picked this up not sure what to expect. I've been burnt on YA thrillers multiple times in the last couple of years, so I have been treading lightly with YA thrillers because I just tend to get very excited about it and then get crushed because either the plot twist is bad, the writing's bad, or there's too much teen angst and teen drama, or something prevents me from fully enjoying the YA thriller. Even though there are some very good YA thrillers, I can make a whole video on some that I really like. It just, you have to sort through the bad to get to the good. And I had no expectations of this book. I just was like, kind of funny title, and it's based off of Serial, and I watched that show and thought it was really interesting, and I love true crime and plucky sleuths solving stuff. So picked this one up, and it's very impressive. I think this is one of the best YA thrillers to come out in many years, and I can't wait to check out more by this author. This is actually her debut novel, which blew me away. I assumed she had written other books before this, but she did not. This is her first one. So this book follows a girl named Pip, and she is trying to unravel this crime and this case that happened 5 years ago in her town that involved somebody she knew, and it goes from there. I don't want to go too much into the plot of this because I think not knowing too much about the story is very beneficial. And yeah, I pretty much just read the inside flap and then started reading the book, and there are lots of twists in this, and things make sense, which is really nice. It doesn't have a lot of the bad YA tropes, like there's no love triangle or insta-love. It doesn't focus too much on the teen angst or drama. Like, there's enough to make it feel realistic and be like, yeah, this girl is still in high school, but it doesn't ever take over, and that's awesome. And Pip as a character, I really liked her. She is a good friend, she's a good sister, she's very determined to solve this mystery. There are a couple times where she makes mistakes, but I think that's good. I don't like following a character who's absolutely perfect and makes all the correct decisions, but she is still smart, and she is determined, and she's somebody you can really get behind and root for, and I really liked that aspect of her. And there are definitely some twists in here, like multiple, and I really enjoyed that a lot. And you know, I guessed a few elements of it, but that's okay because she did a good job kind of peppering in the clues, because I don't like it when a thriller comes out of left field and it's like, oh wait, this is the murderer, this is the person, and I'm like, wait a minute, but you didn't set that up, this is a totally different character that you never introduced in the thriller. So yeah, so I highly recommend checking this one out. Good Girl's Guide to Murder. Alright, next books I want to talk about. This trilogy right here. So we have The Cruel Prince, The Wicked King, and The Queen of Nothing. So, what's really cool about this series is I didn't know what to expect with it. I heard it was good, and then that was about it. And this really impressed me. This trilogy, I just flew through it in like a day and a half. They're very fast-paced, easy to get through, well-written, enjoyable, and yeah, there's pretty much what I want to say about this series is that it's one of the better YA fantasy series or trilogies I've read in a very long time. This book series really focuses mainly on Jude. She's the main character, she's immortal in the fairy world, and really about her ascent to power. There's a little bit of romantic element to it, but not much. Like, I feel like there's enough for people who like romance. If there's like romantic tension, they can kind of focus on that, but if you don't care about romance, then you can ignore that little bit of it, because it really, it's about Jude and her kind of almost being like F you to a lot of the jerk fairy people, because a lot of fairies don't like humans and look down on them, and it's all about her being very focused and determined and a total badass and being like, no, I want to have power and I want to live here in fairy. I'm not going to get kicked out of my home. I was born and raised, well, she wasn't born there, but she was basically raised there by a red cap. A red cap is basically like this fey creature who really likes war and bloodshed. He had killed her mother and father and abducted Jude, her twin sister, and their older sister, Vivi, who is actually half Fae, and Marduk, the Redcap's true daughter. And it goes from there. And I loved the fairy. There are definitely quite a few creatures in this, which I really liked. There's a ton of mythology, and I liked that. And you really feel like you're immersed in this world. The world building is very solid, and it is really a page turner. Once you're in it, you are rooting for Jude. She is a very compelling character. She's not perfect, and there are times where she makes some decisions where I'm like, all right, you're doing that. But for the most part, you really root for her, and especially in the first book where she's going through some hardcore bullying, and I just really felt for that, and she just was not going to back down. Like, that is just somebody you can root for and really appreciate. So that was how I felt about Jude and these books. They really surprised me, and especially with the fact that there was a fantasy series that I was hoping to get into, Nevernight, which I had expected to like that book. And when I realized I didn't like that book, but I loved this series, it kind of surprised me. I thought it was going to be the opposite, but no, I really liked all three of these books. My only criticism of the series would be that in the Queen of Nothing, I feel like this book wrapped up a little fast. I liked the ending, but I feel like there are like 20 pages missing, and there's like a few things where it's like, okay, I feel like this should have been stretched out a little bit, and it felt a little rushed, especially because this is the shortest of the three books. But other than that, I really enjoyed the whole series. Highly recommend it if you like fantasy, and give it a shot, even if you're worried that it's going to be too like filled with YA tropes and too much romance or anything like that. It is one of the best trilogies I've read in many years, really, that is a YA trilogy. It's been a while since I've read a really good series like this, so go check it out. Next I want to point out is My Pretties by Jeff Strand. This one was super fun. So Jeff Strand, he is known for having like very fun concept books. He has a sense of humor, and you can just fly through his books. They're very enjoyable and easy to read. And this one, I read 2 of his books this month. This one is the one I liked better. Even though I liked the Haunted Forest Tour a lot, but I feel like the character work in this one was a lot better. Because in the Haunted Forest Tour, the concept was awesome, and there were so many fun monsters and so many fun action scenes that I really liked, but the characters were kind of flat for the most part, at least like the main characters, and then like the secondary characters were actually more fleshed out than the first couple. So, but this one, it's the opposite. The characters were really well done. So you have 2 main women, and they are trying to catch a serial killer, and then things start to happen, and there's like a very humorous element to this story that I don't want to spoil for anybody, but once you get to like the halfway mark and you realize something happens and you're like, wait, is this actually for real? And it is, and it's funny. That's like the one thing though with Jeff Strand books, is that if you don't get the humor, you kind of think it's weird. So just know going into that the humor, if it's not for you, you may feel like it's just weird and not something you're interested in, and it may almost make the story feel kind of cheesy. But I thought it was funny. And I really liked the main characters a lot. I liked their dynamic. You actually have one character who's lesbian and one character who's straight, but they still have this like powerful female friendship going on, which I liked too, because in a lot of books you don't really get that. Or if you have a lesbian character, then she automatically has to be paired up with the other girl character, and they made it clear in this that doesn't happen, but they're still really fun friends, and I liked that a lot. So this one, if you're looking for a serial killer story, go check this one out. So next up we have Garden of Fiends, and we have Little Wives of Suffering. Both of these are part of the Tales of Addiction horror. These are 2 collections. We've got novellas and some short stories mixed in with both of these, and they're by some pretty well-known horror authors, just a wide variety of different authors. Both of these I rated 4 stars each, And I'm going to do a more in-depth review on both of these, kind of comparing and contrasting them, talking about them, and sort of my thoughts and feelings on them. I think this was very interesting to read. Very dark. Very dark. Trigger warnings galore. I will go more into depth in the review, but let me just say some of these are pretty tough to read at times, and there's a lot. There's a lot in these stories, and some of them are not fun, because really addiction is a difficult subject and not a pleasant one for a lot of people. Most people don't really want to think about addiction or really talk about it, so, but I think it's very important, and addiction is really the best way to talk about addiction and really experience it is through horror, because it's really a horrifying thing. It's a horrifying disease and disorder that so many people are dealing with, and horror captures that the best, I would say. So, these two, 4 stars. For the most part, the stories were very enjoyable. There are just like 1 or 2 in each collection that I didn't quite connect with and thought were kind of weak, but for the most part, they averaged out to be 4 stars and enjoyable and worth checking out. Alright, so some of the more disappointing books of this month, I would probably say Descent by Tim Johnston. I actually wasn't originally even planning on reading this book, but I forgot I had it. It was in the trunk of my car, and I'm like, hey, a library book. That's right, I wanted to check this out because it's a wilderness story. This one sounded really cool. Pretty much it's about this girl who gets abducted in like a foresty area, and she just is never to be seen again. And I thought it was going to be about either tracking her down or her surviving. I was expecting it to be a lot different than what it was. Unfortunately, this book ended up being mainly a family drama about the family members of this girl who went missing and how they are processing the loss, which sounds like still could be a very solid book, but I just didn't like the execution of it, especially because I really thought this was going to be a thriller. I wanted a wilderness thriller, and I wanted some serial killer action or girl surviving in the woods action, and I just didn't really get much from this book. It was the pacing was off, and overall it was just kind of a letdown, which is such a bummer because I feel like this book had potential. It just ended up being just kind of boring, and it was difficult to make myself finish reading, and it was just not what I wanted. So sadly, this book was maybe a 2 star, maybe a 2.5. Next one, we have The Boatman's Daughter by Andy Davidson. So this one was the most disappointing, even though I still gave it like 2.5 stars. This one, I had high hopes for it. I love just Southern Gothic stories. I like books that take place in like the bayou or a swamp that have this really interesting atmosphere and witchcraft and supernatural elements, so I thought I was going to like this, and I really had to push myself to read this book. It's not even that long of a book. It's like 403 pages, and it just took me forever to read. And I think part of it was because I just didn't connect with Miranda, the main character, for whatever reason. I just felt like there's almost like a wall between us, and I just didn't really get a sense of who she was and why she was doing what she was doing. The writing in this is really well done. It's very lush. I had that sense of place that I really like. So the setting of it was good, and the writing was great, and I liked those elements. But the horror and the supernatural parts it wasn't enough. I think I would have preferred the story had it focused more on the witch, because there is this Russian witch who lives in the swamp. We don't really follow her that much. Like, she is a character, but she doesn't really play as big of a role as I wanted. And the supernatural elements kind of seemed more like they were just thrown in. In a way, this book almost seemed like it wanted to be both like a crime novel, like a gritty crime novel, and also a Southern Gothic supernatural horror, and it just didn't really quite work. I think it should have either focused on one or the other, because the vast majority of the horrible stuff, the horrific stuff, happened in this book, happened from humans being crappy, which In The Devil All the Time works because that book is a gritty crime novel. But in this, when you're expecting it to be some sort of fun, lush, supernatural magic book, and, you know, I was hoping for there to be some more witchcraft and some, just something was just missing from this book, and especially because I didn't find myself invested in the characters much, I could barely make it through. So overall, this was, I think, the most disappointing because I thought I was going to like it, and it just didn't end up working, unfortunately. The Woman in Cabin 10. So Ruth Ware is extremely uneven as an author for me. The Turn of the Key was pretty enjoyable. I've done a review on this book on this channel. It was not quite a 4-star, but it was close. In a Dark, Dark Wood, I did not like, flat out. And then there's one other book of hers that I've read that was like, okay. And then The Woman in Cabin 10, I also really disliked. I think it's because the main character, so The Woman in Cabin 10, I feel like is supposed to be like the girl on the train, which I read years ago, like basically when it came out, and I did see the movie, and it has that unreliable narrator, but instead of alcoholism playing a role, it's anxiety. I did not like the way anxiety was portrayed in The Woman in Cabin 10. Like, it was almost like, oh, because Lo, the main character, takes anxiety medication, she must be unreliable, and it was just weird. But I didn't like Lo as a character. I felt like she was very rude and a jerk and just difficult to like, and it's one thing if you're making your character supposed to be unlikable, but I don't actually think she was supposed to be unlikable. I think she just ended up being unlikable, which is kind of like how in A Dark, Dark Wood, I also didn't like the main character for that book, and when you're supposed to really connect with the main character when it's told in a first-person point of view, and I feel like it's really important to have a character that you get attached to and you're rooting for, and it just didn't work with this book. Didn't like the way anxiety was portrayed, and I'm, you know, someone who's very sympathetic for that. I just felt like it was used in a very odd way. And of course, the plot twist was bad. Didn't like the ending. I felt there were a lot of illogical issues happening, a lot of plot holes, a lot of things that weren't resolved. It was kind of confusing at times, and it was such a bummer because the cover is gorgeous, and I like the setup and the location. It just reminds me of And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, and I really enjoy that book a lot. It's one of my favorite classics, and anything remotely like And Then There Were None, I'm sold. But it just didn't work for this book, and the comparison between this book and just Ruth Ware in general to Agatha Christie, I feel like is just not correct. I don't dislike Ruth Ware. I will still probably check out some more of her books because I have a 3-strike rule for authors. So, and she hasn't hit the 3-strike yet. She's got two books that I disliked by her. So she has one more chance. If I read another book of hers that's awful, then I'm not going to revisit her books unless somebody pays me to do it. But yeah, Woman in Cabin 10, I feel like you can really skip. It's not enjoyable, and, you know, I mean, do what you like, but I feel like just there's so many other good thrillers out there that you can enjoy, and so many other good mysteries that have a really good payoff. So overall, it's a 1 out of 5 star for me. Alright, next book I want to talk about is Dark Ride by Ian Rob Wright. This book, love the cover. This one was a 2.5 star read for me as well. I was a bit disappointed with it, and part of this is probably it was me and not the book's fault, where I got spoiled on this book. I didn't realize it at the time, but there's another book by this author that's called 12 Steps, and it had to do with basically a bunch of AA people at an AA meeting, Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, getting attacked and murdered, and I read the book back in December. But there's a character from this book who ends up in that author's book, 12 Steps, and it gives away the entire story, like the resolution of this book, because one of the characters is in that story. So I still kept plowing through it. I'm like, well, okay, so I kind of know how it ends, but I'm still going to read this because, you know, it has to do with amusement park, and I love amusement parks, and carnivals, festivals, theme parks, you name it. I really like them, and this takes place in an abandoned theme park. And unfortunately, this one was kind of disappointing, especially because I had read two other books that were sort of similar, like Ghostland and Haunted Forest Tour, and both of those were pretty enjoyable. And the fact that I read this book after those two made me realize that this was definitely the weakest of the three. I think part of it had to do with things just not quite working the way the author wanted them to work, and the ending I felt like was kind of cheesy, and you could see everything coming. Even if I hadn't been spoiled with the other book, I just still feel like it was not... I feel like maybe with some more work done, like maybe this was like a first draft, and if the author sat down and kind of worked on this a little bit more, it may have been a little bit more enjoyable. But something just was off on this book, and even though the park itself was really cool, I just felt like there was just... the author was trying to just throw in too many things into this, and it just fell flat. Alright, next up we have Ghostland by Duncan Ralston. This one was very fun. This one is basically Ghosts meets Jurassic Park, and it was really interesting. I will definitely say that, just like with some of these horror books, the writing is not going to be literary quality. It's not going to be, you know, gorgeous writing that is just lush and you just start like drooling over the prose, but they can still be very fun and enjoyable too. So when I talk about horror books, a lot of times I'm not really factoring in whether or not I think that they're literary geniuses, because a lot of times they aren't, but they're still fun, and I still like to read that, and I still think concepts like this are fun to explore. And I happen to like Jurassic Park, I happen to really like paranormal stuff in my books and ghosts, so I read this and really enjoyed it. There is a website that ties into this book, and I'm going to be doing a more in-depth video talking about this and comparing it to Haunted Forest Tour and Dark Ride, so stay tuned for that. That's going to come out in the next couple of days because there's a lot of interesting parallels between the three books, but this one was very fun. Next up we have James A. Moore and Jeff Strand, who wrote The Haunted Forest Tour. So The Haunted Forest Tour, I enjoyed this. It was a lot of fun. If you are looking for a book where you want creatures, you want creature feature, action, you want lots of stuff, this is this book. It basically is chock full of monsters, which is great, because I found that there are some books that say, oh, there's going to be lots of really cool action scenes and monsters, and then you spend 3/4 of the book focused on something totally different, and then you only get the creature at the end. Nope, this book, there is lots of action, and there are so many different critters, and I enjoyed that a lot. In fact, I think the biggest criticism I have of this book is the fact that the character development was lacking. This is very much a plot-driven book. This is very much an action-driven book, and sort of a high-concept-driven book, which is enjoyable, but just know that the characters, especially the main dude, he's just your basic average white dude. He's, you know, he hates his job, he has gone through a divorce, and then that's like basically it. Like, I didn't read this that long ago, and I don't really remember a whole lot about this dude. Some of the secondary characters were a lot more developed. Like, his mother was cool, I liked her, and there's this one writer, debunker guy named Lee, who was an older guy, and I really liked his character as well. But some of the other characters were just not really well developed. But if you're just looking to have fun, and you're looking for something high concept, and you just want to pretty much just see monsters killing people and then people defending themselves against monsters for the bulk of the story, then this will satisfy that. So I'm also going to be talking more about this book in the video that I'm going to have come out very soon, where I talk about the 3 theme park horror books that I read this month and kind of comparing and contrasting them and seeing which one's the best one. So stay tuned for that, but this one, Haunted Forest Tour, was very fun. Camp Slaughter by Sergio Gomez. Camp Slaughter was fun. It's basically sort of a slasher novel, Like, if you took a slasher movie and you made it into a novel, this is it. And it was very enjoyable. There were some twists to the story that I liked, and if you're a horror movie fan, then I think you'll really like this book because it's fast-paced, there's lots of gore, and the characters, I wouldn't say they're like super well developed, but they're, I would say, more developed than like The Haunted Forest Tour or some of the other books of this type. And it's a setup for at least there's a setup for a sequel. I don't know if it's going to be a series or what, but this is the first book, and I definitely am going to be continuing to follow this author and see what Camp Slaughter 2 is going to be like. But this is very fun. I think this will be a very fun summer read, and you should definitely give it a shot. Next up is Terminal by Michael Brent Collins. This book was 3 out of 5 star. I enjoyed myself while reading it, but it's not without its issues. So this book, I think the main thing is it probably just needs to be edited more. Like, it almost kind of read like a not a first draft, but I mean like a second draft maybe, and there were some changes that needed to be made. There's definitely some typos, quite a few typos, which that doesn't really necessarily factor into my star rating, because sometimes I just ignore those because it's like, you know, I'm not looking for perfection, but if it's enough to be distracting, then I do start to consider that and take that into my rating. And I think there are a few things I would have changed with this story, but overall it is a very cool concept. Essentially, this takes place at a bus terminal in the middle of small town nowhere, Idaho, and this mysterious fog rolls in and people get trapped in the terminal, and it's like a group of, I think, 10 or so, and right away they realize they are stuck there and they can't escape. Only one person can escape, and they have to vote unanimously on who is the one who leaves. And it's a very fun story. It just needs some polishing, and I think that there were a couple changes I think that could have been made to make the story stronger. But I saw what the author was trying to do and thought it was like very, very cool. So I definitely am going to be checking out more by this author. In fact, I've ordered another book by him, and it's going to be appearing in my book haul and June TBR video that's going to be coming out soon. It just, yeah, so I don't really, I don't want to discourage people from reading it. I think you should go check it out. Just know that it's a bit unpolished, it's not perfect, it has its issues, it's a little rocky in some places, and there are definitely quite a few errors. It may have just even been in the copy I have, but there are definitely like some typos and some grammar errors and some other stuff going on. But overall, still 3 out of 5 star. Liked the concept and liked what the author was trying to say. Next one, we have Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This one was 4 out of 5 star. I enjoyed it. I think, though, I didn't like it as much as I liked Recursion or the Pines trilogy, which is also by Blake Crouch. Like Wayward Pines series, I liked those books a lot. And I think this one, I think it's just because I liked the concept of recursion more. I've always loved the idea of memories and the importance of memory, and I felt like the stakes were higher in that, and there's like this pretty intense element to the story, almost apocalyptic element to that book, as opposed to this one. I liked the parallel universe concept a lot. It's very fascinating, and it's a page turner, it's very gripping, but when I compared it to Recursion and the Wayward Pines trilogy, it just was not up there with those. This is just an example. This is probably just me. Like, I think other people may have different reactions to this story. You may like Dark Matter a lot more than Recursion, and I think it just depends on a couple different factors that are probably pretty personal, and it's up to you. Like, I know some people find parallel universes a lot more interesting than they find memories and time travel, but I do like this book. I thought it was very solid. It's very fast-paced, easy to read, easy to get into, and there's a lot for you to think about. And I think it could have just been the fact that I read Recursion not that long ago and just thought it was going to be, I was holding this book up to Recursion level, and it just was not quite there. But a 4-star is still a good read. So it was still enjoyable, and if you haven't already checked this out, I do think it's worth it if you're looking for a sci-fi novel that is pretty approachable, that isn't like a space opera or like super dense. This will be a fun, fast-paced read. Another book I want to talk about is Nevernight. So Nevernight, it's tricky to talk about this book because it's just well loved on BookTube and Goodreads. Everyone likes this book, and I feel like I'm totally in the minority on this, but I just didn't care for it. I thought I was going to like it. In fact, I assumed I was going to like Nevernight more than the Folk of the Air trilogy or the Cruel Prince trilogy by Holly Black. I just thought that Nevernight was more my alley. And unfortunately, Nevernight, even though it's marketed as an adult fantasy series, it reads more like a YA series in like a bad way. And I'm not like hating on YA, because there are a lot of YA books that I like. There are a lot of YA tropes that I don't like and was hoping weren't going to be in Nevernight, because I was expecting to be a mature adult novel and it was not. And they're just like, it just seemed like it was trying to be so edgy all the time, where it's like, I'm an edgy person, I'm an edgy character, and this, and then there's like a weird masquerade ball thing where I don't know, it just seemed like it was thrown in there just to have it in there, and I didn't like how there's like some creepy elements to the main character and weird sex stuff. I don't know, it was just hard to describe. I'm gonna do a review on it, but it just missed the mark for me, and I don't want to be like negative about it. It just didn't work for me. I just didn't really like it, and I have no interest in continuing with the series, and I was really shocked. A Lush and Saving Hell by John Horner Jacobs. So this book, it's really just a bind-up of 2 novellas by the author, and I enjoyed both of them. I would say I liked the first one more than the second one. The first one was close to a 5-star, and the second one was more like a 3.5, so it averaged out to be a 4-star. But both of these, if you like cosmic horror, you'll really enjoy these stories quite a bit. And the first novella took me a little while to get into. There's this kind of a longer setup, but once you get set up, there's a pretty solid payoff, I would say. It wasn't my favorite read of the month, but I did enjoy it, and I don't want to really spoil too much about it, so I think you should just, if you like cosmic horror and you are interested in stories that are a little bit different, I think this one would be a fun one to check out, because this author in particular, I thought the writing was really solid, and I'm very interested to check out more of his work. I think he is a very promising horror author, and especially if he gets more into cosmic horror, because I definitely think there should be more cosmic horror out there. I really like it a lot, and I'm actually working on a cosmic horror recommendations video, so that'll be coming out at some point, and this will be on there. I do think it's worth a check. Alright, thank you so much for watching my video. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up before it gets any longer. Thank you so much for sticking with me on this channel. I promise that I'm getting to those videos that I have requests for. I just had a really busy week this past week. Work was ramping up again, and I was just trying to finish some projects I've been working on. But I have a book haul coming up, and a TBR video, and some book reviews, and some other very fun things. And just like always, if there are any books that I talked about in this video that you'd like me to do a more in-depth review on, please let me know. I will definitely do that. And yeah, so let me know, what did you end up reading last month? What was your favorite book of the month? And I will talk to you guys later. So you guys have a great evening. Please like, comment, rate, subscribe, and happy reading. Bye.